We're back after an exciting week 3, full of surprises, some entertaining close games, none more so than the star power that came out to Homewood Field. Don Petramala, 6 goals in the win. Terry, you were there covering it. Dan Aburn, you as well. What were some of the biggest takeaways you took from it?
Yeah, I mean, how awesome is it that Don Petramala scored 6 goals on Dad's old stomping grounds? I mean, the funny thing was, I feel like this was kind of like a scenario that we didn't envision before the week going into it. I think everybody was kind of honing in on Owen Duffy and the start to his season that he's been having, and all of a sudden we're like, oh yeah, Don Petramala. And I think that's kind of been a theme for Carolina so far this year too, is that, oh yeah, we have Don Petramala, who was a number 3 recruit, basically playing in the same year as Duffy now because of the redshirt that it took his real freshman season. And yeah, he was lights out. Just not only the 6 goals, but less like the quality of goals that he was scored, right? He's turning the corner and nailing top shelf. He's pinging corners left and right. The announcer has to announce his name after every goal. It's like, goal, Don Petramala. And every successive one got like sadder.
Well, I'll tell you who did know that the Petramalas were going back to Homewood Field, and it was North Carolina, because I have a feeling that it was if not wildly or frequently spoken element of the locker room, it was certainly understood. And I think that for me, Hopkins 4-0 start, obviously a lot was made of both the speed and quality of those wins. Some of the wins don't look as good after 4 weeks as they did based on the preseason ranking. There was still so much to learn about both of these teams. You felt like you knew more about Hopkins, and I think as a result, the fact that they lost means that, all right, well, at least we knew that they were good, and they can withstand this loss reputationally in a way that had Carolina lost, well, how good's Michigan? And they weren't that inspiring in that win over Stony Brook. And so for me, I think the number one takeaway is about the entirety of Carolina's personnel and my familiarity with the group in total that otherwise hadn't been there. And it's easy to look at Duffy and Petramala and then kind of stop there. And certainly at the other end of the field, it's easy to look at Mike Gianfrancaro and stop there. And you've got a preseason All-American and Brady Wambach at the faceoff X. But in reality, they won because of Duffy and Petramala. They did not win because of Wambach and Gianfrancaro. Those are going to be building blocks that they can use the rest of the season. I felt like there were elements of the defensive game plan that took Hopkins out of their flow and rhythm. They did not get a point out of their first midfield, but they got, I believe, either 4 or 5 points out of their second midfield, of which 2 are freshmen. And so what my takeaway is of Carolina is they're still very much a work in progress. And that's not a nice place to be with being 3-0 on March 1st with Penn and Princeton coming to town, and you've got a top 10 win in your back pocket. For Hopkins, I think that a lot will be said and has been said about the defensive approach playing into Carolina's hands from a matchup standpoint. When you slide to everything, one of your opponent's best skills is dodging bad approaches and the other one is time and room shooting, you're kind of giving them offense. And I feel like that was effectively what the Blue Jays did. And Dan, I know that this is something that you're well familiar with, which is the tension between having an identity and being faithful to it while also adjusting when that identity is not a perfect match for your opponent. So I don't know if you came away with any thoughts on how it manifested.
I don't know that I digested that one deeply enough to be able to really take, a stance one way or another for that game in particular. But I do feel very strongly that throughout the game, you want to approach with your bread and butter, so to speak. But as the game goes along, you have to be able to adjust, or you're going to end up on the wrong side of things.
I'm a big Whitton Coleraine fan. I was pretty surprised that he started on Owen Duffy. The obvious matchup going in for most neutrals and fans of both teams would have had Scott Smith going on at best.
Coleraine guarded a lot of guys last year that you would have put in the number one Dodger spot. So I feel like I interrupt that because I feel like part of what we were talking about is that hot defensive identity, and I think they're at their best when Scott Smith doesn't have to worry about being the number one cover.
Absolutely. Incredible start to this one from the Tar Heels. One of the losers from the weekends, hot starts, honestly. The Heels got out to that quick 3-0 lead. Syracuse, another team who got out to a 5-0 lead against Harvard. And, oh my gosh, the Crimson really came back and stole the show late. Kaplan, Dan, what did you guys take away from this one, Harvard's first ever win in the Dome?
Yeah, resilience, I think, is like the first word that comes to mind. You mentioned the start, but like it happened so quick. It would have been easy for Harvard to kind of put their heads down and be like, and there's one goal in particular where the ball for Syracuse is just clicking, like it's winging around the perimeter, goes to Spalina, goes inside, and someone just like taps it in for a quick stick finish, and it's like they made quick work of that. And then to Harvard, goes all the credit that they were able to figure out, some adjustments to make, figure out a way to be able to climb back in it, and then have the attitude and aptitude and like tenacity that it takes to like scrap and claw. And, I don't know that before that game I would have predicted it to be a low-scoring game. But Harvard being able to, really push the tempo and get to 15 like they did was probably pretty surprising to me.
Yeah, I think the word that comes to me is gutsy. Like Harvard pretty much overcame all the odds to win this game. Pretty much, you mentioned the 5-0 in the hole really quickly, but they also lost like 90% of the faceoffs. This was a game that I had to go and watch, back on demand yesterday, and it's like how does a 5-0 Syracuse start turn into a 15-14? And you look at the stats, and it really just belies kind of like lacrosse logic, right? They lose 90% of the faceoffs. The Graham Stevens, the goalie for Harvard, was lights out. He's a freshman. He's a 5-star. He's playing, just as you would have projected him to play. And they had the bad start. But then, and it was a similar game in a similar sense to the Hopkins Carolina game where in the second quarter, the team that was down kind of found their footing and allowed them to calm down and work their way back into the game. And for Harvard, they go into the half, I think, down 10-8. And then all of a sudden it's 10-10 and you're like, whoa, like we're really in this. Let's go win it. And I think that's kind of what happened. Like I said, the goalie played out of his mind, and then they won the ground ball battle, as you guys mentioned, on the tailgate. And then also I just thought that Harvard's like shorties like really stepped up. And I think Syracuse kind of went into a little bit of hero ball late in the game. And it was interesting. We were discussing it before this. Harvard goes up 15-13 with like 9 minutes to go in the fourth quarter, and all that Syracuse can muster in that final 9 minutes is a 1 goal, and it came around like the 2-minute mark. I think that people want to sell Syracuse down the river after this game, but I think that this is a little bit more of like, this is kind of what we thought Harvard could be, right? Like really good offense. We didn't really know much about their defense, but we obviously have like a freshman keeper we can keep an eye on, but I think this is a great win for Jerry Byrne, and it really, kind of like helps them bounce back after that really kind of head-scratching Colgate loss in the middle of the week.
Yeah, I talked to Jerry yesterday, and one of the things that he said was, in order to win by 1 in the Dome, you have to win by 3. And I asked, I was like, do you feel like you won by 3? And he said, not really, but that the last, however many, he's like last 30 seconds felt like it took 5 minutes. And I think that, one of the things that's probably most disappointing if you're a Syracuse fan is we're getting old. And these are the types of scenarios that we should be able to play with composure. And I didn't get the sense that the Orange did that. And so I'm with you, Dan, in the sense that, it's 2 losses. If Syracuse turns this into whatever and they go on whatever run they go on, if they finish 15-2 and win the national championship, you're like, a loss to Harvard is not going to look that bad in retrospect. When you're digesting it in real time, it's you don't have the benefit of that hindsight, and it does feel alarming.
Just the pretty questionable 2-minute penalty at the end. It's just to give Syracuse that man up.
That was one of the takeaways that we were just talking about off air was you come out, Syracuse has that extra man, and it's one pass to a low-to-low shot from range that is just gobbled up. It's like, we could probably work for something better here. In this moment, I don't know about that one.
Props then, they get it right back, but again, stick in the passing lane. Just shout out Harvard. Like you said, a really gutsy win. I do want to talk a little bit about Maryland coming over to Princeton, giving them a 13-9 win. Now, this is a team that made it to the national championship game a season ago against Notre Dame. Now we're set for a clash, 1v2 down at Atlanta. Notre Dame, of course, avoids another Hoyas upset bid. this season to stay perfect themselves. How exciting of a matchup is this going to be?
Yeah, I am thrilled for this one. I also have learned so far in this season that betting against Maryland is a bad idea. They've made me pay for it every week so far in terms of staff picks and the lines, but this is one that, like, it feels like two forces here early in the season that are going to give us the best game of the year.
Yeah, and I think that especially after this weekend with Notre Dame only winning 11-9 over Georgetown, it kind of feels like maybe Notre Dame isn't as invincible as we thought they are, and Maryland is much better than we would have thought they are. And so I think that really makes this game so much more intriguing, because I think everybody's, a couple weeks ago, everybody said, oh, NDU's going to be winning that game by 1 million points. No, I don't think that's the case this year. It's not going to be like the national championship we had back in Memorial Day. It's not going to be like that at all. I think this is going to be a close one. I think either team could possibly win it.
And for me, I think, the threats from Maryland's offense comes from their optionality. And there was a lot made of how they were able to be productive without relying on Eric Spanos in the Princeton game in ways that they had to rely on Spanos, like, for instance, against Loyola. And one of the things that's going to be an interesting test for Notre Dame's defense is there's a lot of comfort in being able to say, we're going to deploy Sean Light on somebody, take him away, and your offense is going to struggle because you're not used to losing your number one option to the extent that you will against Notre Dame. Maryland does not fall into that category. They do not fall into that trap. And so really what this game is going to make it so exciting, I think so reliably close and so difficult to forecast, is who Maryland gets their production from could be one of any number 9, be like as many as 9, maybe even 10 guys. And then obviously at the other end of the field, I think it's going to be exciting to see how Notre Dame can muster against another very good defense on the back of putting up 11 on Georgetown. But really, and this is one of those things that's always very hard to square. You made the comment about hot starts being the loser for the week, and Notre Dame jumped out to a 6-0 start, ultimately ended up being a competitive game. How much of that is a reflection of the fact that once they got out to that 6-0 start, they took their foot off the gas a little bit relative to it was a 6-0 start that was more reflected in a game that ended up being 2 goals. And I think that we're going to be able to reverse engineer that a little bit based on how Notre Dame plays against Maryland.
Yeah, get your tickets early for this one. It's going to be
the Notre Dame section is already sold out. In Bobby Dodd Stadium, 56,000 fans. I don't know how big the Notre Dame section is, but it's already sold out. So hopefully you're comfortable sitting with the Terps.
The neutral venue will be a good one for sure coming up this weekend. A couple ACC Big Ten clashes want to bring up before we wrap here. Duke, Michigan goes to 8-7 overtime. Andrew McAdory, the hero in that one. And then the shocker of the weekend, of course, Ohio State really just handing it to Virginia 14-5. That was the final. Guys, I think we're down a little bit on Ohio State and Michigan in the first few weeks of the season. And this week, oh my goodness, they are back with a vengeance. What were some of the takeaways?
A vengeance?
Not a vengeance, but
I have a question.
Sure.
Duke, UVA, Michigan, Towson. Are any of them good?
I think that's why I'm questioning whether the extent of the vengeance of which, these teams are back. Okay, so Ohio State, just the takeaway for me in that game was the physicality and the commitment that they out-physicaled Virginia with. And I think if you're Virginia, this is one of those, like, we're not doing anything other than ground ball drills for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We're gonna walk into Homewood Field and there are gonna be visible bruises on our body. With respect to Michigan and Duke, I think the lingering question is how good is Duke? Because now 2 weeks in a row, they've needed late heroics in order to overcome potential upset bids from St. Joe's and Michigan. Michigan, we have a better frame of reference. We know that they, were beaten handily by North Carolina 3 weeks ago, and we now know that North Carolina is probably like a borderline top 5 team. So I think that the questions still linger with Duke and certainly Michigan and Ohio State, even though Ohio State's 5-1 now. I wouldn't put Towson into that category. I think that there are some real questions with the Tigers.
Yeah, I mean, I think with Duke, I think we're going to learn a lot more about them this coming weekend when they play both Princeton and Penn. I agree with Terry, like 100%. I think going into their matchups against St. Joe's and Michigan, we would have thought that they win by numerous goals, right? They don't do that. And so I think there's a lot of questions and a lot of people want to sell on the Blue Devils right now. Ohio State, UVA, can you really call this an upset when you win 14-5? Like, the totality of this victory really should set off alarm bells, I think, for the Cavaliers. The Who's look like they're struggling at this point. I think they only had 2 guys actually score goals in this game.
I also think, like, Ohio State, if you're them, you open in a way that was like you probably felt embarrassed after.
Yeah.
You give up 19 to Utah. And then you have 4 games against teams that will say are opponents that you should handle.
Mm-hmm.
With Virginia, like, kind of at the end of the pipeline. Like, I think that their coaches probably have been able to take a peek down the line and been preparing the Buckeyes to see some of what they're going to see with the Cavaliers for a longer period of time than otherwise you could have. And I think that in general, they just showed like a level of preparedness and like tenacity from the get-go that was a big difference there.
And I think that this was like the Ohio State that we thought we would see, right? Like, really good defense, Bobby Van Buren shutting down his opponents, and Caleb Fayette being pretty locked down in cage, and that's what we saw in this game. So it kind of felt like they were realizing their potential in this one.
Abram, last game I want to ask you about before we wrap here. You cut this up for social. Binghamton with one of the goals of the season so far, tweener, but Marist, oh my goodness, 3 goals in the last minute to steal this one. Just how crazy of a finish was that?
Yeah, so this actually may have been like the most eventful game of the weekend. I mean, which was crazy to say because we had so many one-goal games. But yeah, like Binghamton, Liam Ferris has this ridiculous between-the-legs goal, gets the whole bench juiced. But then Marist kind of pulls off like this miracle comeback. They score 3 goals in 81 seconds, and then they managed to score with zeros on the clock with kind of very much a hero dodge and shoot. It had to go to review, and the funniest part is that it's like a staffer, being shielded by an umbrella, just like giving the officials the video, and it's like they confirm the goal. So Marist with a really exciting victory, and I think if you're on the Sickos committee for lacrosse, you love this game. Go watch it on replay.
Bring out the umbrellas, bring out the fun in this weekend. Can't wait to see what's in store for week 4. And for that, keep on kicking it with us on InsideLacrosse.com and on the IL YouTube. And thanks so much for watching.